right, so we're going to continue on talking about classes and the date class now. Let me just kind of review for us a little bit about what we did last time. So here was our client program that we ended up with at the end of last time. And you can see that there's 3 functions that we're going to be calling here, 3 member functions: date1.set, date1.print, and date2.read. Okay. So if we go and then look at the class declaration that we had, there's the class declaration. There's our 3 member functions I just mentioned. There's our 3 private data members. So you'll notice that the client program I just showed you doesn't make reference to any of those 3, right? So that's kind of the main point of everything here, is that those 3, the client program does not have access to those. And then there's the definitions of our member functions. Yes? Or even, so the question was, is it the case that if the data members are private, then only member functions of that class can modify them? That's true. To be clear, not only can only member functions of the class modify them, only members of the class can look at them. Right? So if you're writing some code and it's not code for a function that's a member of the class, you can't even you have to pretend you don't even know the fact that there's a month data member and a day data member and a year data member. If I am down here in main and I try to say, cout date1.month, okay. Syntactically, that kind of makes sense, right? We're using the dot operator to select one member of the date1 object. But I'll get a syntax error if I do that because the month data member isn't public, it's private. Okay. So I wanted to make a few, just by way of review, make a few more observations about what's going on here before we dive into the next thing we're going to do. So just to review, notice that in each of these 3 member functions, just to take an example, we are using the identifier month. So when we say month inside a member function, what does that mean? What is that referring to? The data member of the class. That's right, but it's more specific than that, right? Because you can't actually, the class itself doesn't physically have data members, right? It's only objects of the class that have those data members, right? So I have to know not which date object am I talking about here? The month data member of which date object? Well, so but I've got two of them declared in my client program, right? So the suggestion was whichever one is declared in my client program. But I've got 2. So which one is? How do I know whether I'm talking about date 1 or date 2 there? Inside my print function, when I say, okay, print the month data member, how do I know whether I'm talking about date 1 or date 2? Right. So it's whatever was the calling object. Does that make sense? So down here, when I say date1.print that, and then I go up here in my print function and I say month, it's going to be the month data member of date 1, right? But then later on, when I say date2.print, and then I use the month data member up there in my member function, it's going to mean the month data member of date 2. Okay. All right. So let me just say that again. In that case, when I use the word month there, that means the month data member of the calling object. Same thing for the other data members, right? When I say day, that means the day data member of the calling object. Okay? So, taking a look at my read function, I wanted to make sure everyone was clear on what was going on in that statement. Does that make sense, or do I need to talk about that some more? What's the user going to, give me an example of what the user is going to be typing here when I read. Go ahead. 3 integers separated by slashes, right? So I'm reading the first integer and putting it into the data member month, and then I'm using this to read over the slash, right? The slash is going to get put into this variable called dummy, and then I'm going to read the next integer into the data member day, and then I'm going to read a slash into this variable dummy, and so on. So really, this function would work if I use something besides slashes, right? All that matters is that there's something in between, something that's not a number in between the 3 parts of the date. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, we're not using dummy. Dummy never gets used, right? So it's just a place for us to store a value because we need some place to store it even though we're never going to use it. Yeah. No, because month is an int, right? And when we know that when we use the extraction operator to read an int, it reads the whole integer that it sees next, not just the first digit. Okay. Okay. Let's move on and extend the functionality of our class. Okay. So far, all we can do is read dates, set dates, and print dates. Not too exciting. Let's write a function oops. I'll just tack it on to the end of my main function here that tests 2 dates to see if one comes before the other. Okay, so if date 1 comes before date 2, then I'm going to print date 1 comes before date 2. Otherwise, I'm going to print date 1 does not come before date 2. Any questions about what the comes before function is going to do? It's going to have a calling object. How many parameters is it going to have? This is a really important question. And you can tell by looking at the function. Here's the function call, right? How many arguments do you see there? 1. So how many parameters is the comes before function going to have? 1. Okay, so it's comparing 2 dates. The dates it's comparing are the calling object and the parameter. That make sense? That's a little different from what we're used to, right? We're used to thinking, well, if you're comparing 2 dates, you need 2 parameters. But that's not how it's going to work. Often with classes, it's going to work differently. What kind of value comes before going to return? We want that thing that I have highlighted right there. That's an expression, and we want that expression to evaluate to either true or false, right? So it's going to return a bool. Okay. Let me say this, and this is actually a really important hint for assignment 9. Assignment 9, right? Yeah, assignment 9. In assignment 9, I give you the client program. When you look at a function call, if you want to know what the header for a member function is going to look like, you can tell by looking at the function call in the client program. Does that make sense? You don't have to kind of try to figure it out. You look at the function call in the client program, that tells you exactly what the member function header is going to look like. It tells you the return type. It tells you how many parameters there are going to be. It tells you what the type of the parameters are. How do I know the type of the parameter? So this thing in here is the argument So the parameter is going to have to match the type of that argument, right? So what type is that argument? Well, I can go back up here and look. Let's see, what type is date 2? Date 2 is type date. So I know that when I write the header for my comes before function, the parameter is going to be of type date. Any questions about any of that? We're going to do that a few times, but I just want to throw that out there at the start because a lot of students get stuck right. I mean, that's like that's like getting stuck out of the gates, right? When you're trying to write a member function, first thing you got to do is figure out what's the return type, what are the parameters, right? A lot of students get stuck right out of the gate. Okay, so let me write my comes before function. First, let me add it to my class declaration. So what was the return type? Bool. And the name of the function was comes before. And then there was one parameter, right? What was the type of the parameter? It was a date, right? And let me call this other date. Okay? So that's my prototype. And then let me come down here and actually write the function. Bool comes before date, other date. Okay, so what's missing from here? There's something missing from here, right? When I'm writing a member function definition, I don't want this to be a global function, a standalone function, right? I want this to be a function that's a member of the date class. So I have to tell it that by using the scope resolution operator and the word date in front of it. Okay, so every time. That was a big complicated explanation for why we need that there. You know, I mean, even if you don't really get that, it's okay. Just remember when you're defining your member functions, you put date : in front, right? Or whatever the name of the class is, : okay, how are we going to tell if the calling object date comes before the other date? Okay, so one suggestion is to test the year first, and then the month, and then the day. I like that suggestion because if you start with the day, you can't really tell anything, right? So, but if you start with the year, there's some things you can tell right away, and we can just return. Boom. So, for example, what? If someone else. Someone said year is less than other date dot year. Okay, I'm making you do this now because I know this is hard, right? We're not used to doing this. We're not used to. We got to figure out what it is we want, and we also got to figure out what the syntax is for it. What do you guys think about that? Does that look good? Okay, good question. Year is private. Can we access the year right here? This is a member function of the date class. So we can access the private data members. Okay, so it's down in main where we can't do that. Okay? All right, so let's look at what this means, okay? Someone tell me what this means when I put the word year here. What is it I'm referring to? The data member, the year data member of the calling object, right? Okay, which back there, if you look back at main, in this particular case, the calling object was date 1, right? So what we're saying here is that if the year data member of the calling object is less than the year data member of the other date, then what do we want to do? What do you think? Does that make sense? the year on the calling object is less than the year on the parameter or the argument, if this year is less than this year, then I want to return true, right? That makes sense to me. All right, so someone else tell me what's going to come next. I heard if. Yeah, okay, that's good, if. Go ahead in the back. Did someone have a hand in the back? No. If month. Look. What do you guys think about that? Yeah. Does that make sense? So someone said, if, in the way I have it written now, if the year of the calling object is bigger than the other date's year, but its month is less, this is going to return true, even though the calling object is actually bigger than the other date. Does that make sense? So we're missing something here. Well, else isn't really going to help because I mean we could use else, but else doesn't really help because we're using return anyway. So if we're using return in the if part, then whether we have an else or not is equivalent. Go ahead. Okay, so we could put this if statement inside another if statement that says if the years are equal. So conceptually what you're saying there is that we only want to say this, we only need to check the months if the years are equal, right? Okay, so I think what you're saying is true, but I don't think it's the best way to do it. I think we could get really complicated really fast if we do that. The real problem here is that we've jumped into months and we're not actually done looking at the years yet. Right? Go ahead. So you're on the right track. Okay, else, return false. Okay, I understand where your brain was going, but what was wrong with that? If the years are equal, that's not necessarily true, right? Okay, so let me take a step back here just for a second and say that right now we're not actually talking about classes at all, right? We're talking about how to write an algorithm to compare two dates. And that's okay. That's a good thing to talk about because it's good practice. Did you have a suggestion? No. Go ahead. Okay, so the suggestion is to do something like this. Month is less than other date dot month. Okay. That's actually true, right? If the year is less than another day dot year and month is less than another day dot month, then return true. That works, but I guess I don't think it helps us because it's still the case that we always want to return true. Whoops. Yeah. We always want to return true if year is less than another date dot year. Period. Even if the months are big, it doesn't matter about the months and the days, right? At this point, if year is less than another date dot year, we want to return true. Like here, if year is greater than other date dot year, true or false? What do you guys think about that? Okay, so everyone agrees that this is accurate, right? If the year is less than the other date dot year, then we're going to return true. Everyone agree that this is accurate? If the year of the calling object is greater than the year in the parameter, then we return false, right? Because the calling object is not less than the parameter. And now, after this, at this point in my program, what can I say is true? The years are equal, right? I'll just write it that way. That make sense? Okay. Look how I guess I want you to just stop for a second and look at how we're doing this, right? We're not just kind of throwing code out there because it seems right, okay? Every time we put some code out there, we're thinking about it, and we are talking about what we know now at this point in the code, okay? So, when you're trying to come up with an algorithm like this, there are some ways to be disciplined about it. And one is to stop and think, okay, what do I know is true now? Yeah, I know the years are equal, so now what can I say? Now I can start looking at the months, right? Yeah. So if the month is now this if statement works, right? Because I know the years were equal. And then what else am I going to say? Okay. All right, so now what do we know at this point? If I got this far in the code, that means that the years and the months are equal. So what do I want to return? Check the days. So what do I type? So once of this, we can just say return false here. At that point, does that make sense? Well, if they're equal, does the first date come before the second date? No. So if I get two dates that are equal, what do I want to return? False. Right? I've got a function that returns true. I want it to return true if the calling object comes before the parameter. So if they're equal, I want to return false. Okay. All right. I think this will work. There's one thing I want to point out, though. I can't remember. I think I've talked. Yeah, when we talked about is leap year, I think I had this discussion with you. Okay. I can simplify this. Remember, I said anytime I have. Okay. First of all, this is equivalent to that, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Anytime I have if something return true, else return false, that can be simplified. Return day less than other date dot day. Okay, so this is equivalent to this. Okay, and if you write this, it'll work, but it's more complicated, and if someone else who's an experienced programmer looks at their code, they'll go, this person doesn't really know what they're doing. Okay? Can I delete this now? Everyone okay with that? Okay. All right. I think I'm done writing my comes before function. I've got my definition here. I've got my prototype here. And I've got some code to test it here. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. I should save this some. Oh, look, it is here. I did have it here. In documents. It's still sitting there. I went to all that trouble of copying it back in there. Okay. So let me just call this 3.cpp. And next time I'll remember to look in the documents folder. Okay, so date 1 is April 27, 1947. I'm going to enter another date. I should try to do something tricky here, I guess, like 4/26, 1947. So I have to go all the way to the day. The years are going to be equal. The months are going to be equal. Okay, so what should come out on the as a result of the comes before function? Date 1 does not come before date 2, right? Yeah. Try that again. Oh. Let's see, 4/26/1947. So I should say it does not come before date 2, which it does. Okay. I could try it again and try 4/27/1947. What should it come out as? Date 1 does not come before date 2, right? But then if I do it again and I try 4/28/1947, then it should come before. Okay? Now if I really wanted to, if I was writing assignment 9, what I would do is I would spend about 15 minutes testing every possible scenario that I could think of and make sure that this really works all the time. What if the years aren't equal? Does it work? What if the year 1 comes before year 2? Does it work? What if year 2 comes before year 1? Does it work? What if the years and the days are equal but the months are different? Does it work? See what I'm saying? Test this thing exhaustively, make sure it works before you go on and add your next function. And that's normally the way you're going to develop classes, right? You're going to start with the smallest thing possible, make sure it works, then start adding on one function at a time. Iterative development. Okay. Any questions about the comes before function? All right. Here's what I want to do next. I want to write an increment member function now. And guess what increment is going to do? Yeah, it's going to increase the date by 1 day. Increase isn't quite the right word, right? It's going to bump up the day to the next day. I'm trying to think of the technically correct way to say that, but increment, okay. All right. So 1 day later, day 2 is day 2.print. Okay. Let's try to, first of all, I'm going to have to write the header for this function, right? Is this going to, what type of function is this going to be? What type of value is it going to return? It's a void function, right? Because it's sitting on a line by itself. It's not an expression, right? Here's the function call right there, right? Is that being used like a statement or like an expression? It's a statement, right? It's not like I said x gets day 2.increment or something like that. All right. So it's going to be void. And how many parameters are they going to be? Well, how many arguments do you see here? 0. So how many parameters are they going to be? 0. All right. So void, void, increment, no parameters. That was easy. Void, date colon increment. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're going to write some code that changes the calling object, right? Increases the calling object by 1. Doesn't do anything else. Doesn't change anything else. Doesn't return anything. It just changes the calling object. Okay? You know, that's just how I defined this. I could have defined my increment function so that it didn't change the calling object. It returned an object that was 1 bigger. Does that make sense? So this is a little bit arbitrary. This is just how I've decided to do it. But sorry, I'm digressing a little bit here. But let's take a step. I'm taking a step back to look at the big picture again. Basically, every function I have here so far is analogous to an operator that we would use if we were dealing with ints. Right? We had this. What operator is that analogous to? Except see how it's not an operator. Insertion operator, right? Inserting something into the stream. What's that? Extraction operator. What's that? Assignment operator. What's that? Comparing two dates to see which one comes before. Sounds like what? Less than. Yeah. Isn't that kind of an sorry? Kind of a relational operator, right? It's less than. It's basically analogous to the less than operator, right? And and then okay. So what is this analogous to? Plus plus, right? And well, just to give you kind of a sneak preview, okay? If you're back for CS11, you will learn about how to actually, instead of writing things called print and read and set and comes before, you'll learn how to actually make it so that the operators themselves work on objects of type date. So I could use a less than operator to compare due dates, and I can write the function that tells the compiler how to do that. So that's called operator overloading. And if you take CS11 from me, it'll be like the first thing we do. Okay, so we're working on increment. How are we going to increment a date? Increment the calling object. Go ahead. Have to check and see if you're at the end of the month, because otherwise it's complicated. But you know, let me. Here's a suggestion I have about how to. So we're again at that point where we're not really talking about classes anymore. Now we're talking about how to create an algorithm to do something. If there's a very simple way of solving something that gets 99% of the cases, often, not always, but I guess I would say usually, it's a good idea to just handle that case and then handle the special cases, right? So 99% of the time, I can do the increment in one statement, right? What's it going to be? Actually, not 99% of the time, about 92% of the time, right? Day plus plus, right? So my suggestion here is let's go ahead with day plus plus, and then let's fix this if it turns out that we were at the end of a month. Okay, so how can we do that? Okay, so we have to figure out how many days are in the month that we're in, right? Okay, so I'm not sure if I am helping you to be able to do this other than just by example, but I don't want to start thinking. I don't want to go down the path of if it's January or March or May or whatever, then I want to say if day is equal to 32, or if day is greater than 31. But if it's these other months, then I want to check if day is greater than 30, okay? I want to abstract that process, right? I want to procrastinate on thinking about all of that stuff, and I want to figure out a way to say that just very simply right here. Any ideas? What is conceptually, what is it I'm trying to say here? If day is greater than days in month. Does that make sense? Then what do I do? Increment the month and set the days to 1. Okay, so now I've got this so that it's working. Oh, I said 90. Never mind what I said about working 92% of the time. I was totally out of it. Just erase that. Okay, so this works most of the time, a high percentage of the time. When does this not work? So what do we say? If month is greater than 12, right, then increment the year, month equals 1. Day's already 1, right? This is only checking the case where it was December 31st. If it's December 31st, this if statement is going to get executed, so day's already going to have been 1. Okay? So, everyone okay with that? Look good? Shall I run this now and see if it works? I haven't gotten the days and month function yet, right? Yes. So the calendar program? Yeah, we could actually. This would be an excellent time to do that. The only problem is we can't actually just copy the whole function over, right? Because that wasn't, well, I suppose we could, days and month. In our calendar program, that function just took month as a parameter, right? So I suppose it would be possible to just use exactly that same function, just copy it over. And what we would do in that case is we would put it in our date class, we could include it up here as sort of part of the date class, but it would not technically be a member of the date class. Does that make sense? So I would just in that case I could just make it a global function, and I would call it like days in month, and I would send month, the month data member of the current calling object as the parameter, right? Yes, you're right. So in our calendar program, our days and month function had 2 parameters, two parameters, a month and a year. Does that sound right? I'm trying to remember. It seems like it would need to, right? You can't definitively tell how many days are in a month unless you know the year too. Right. So the year. I'm not going to do it that way here, though. Okay. In this case, I actually think it's better to make this a member function and have it just tell me how many days are in the month of whatever the calling object date is. Does that make sense? Okay. The little discussion we had about making something that's sort of, quote, part of a class, unquote, but not a member of the class, make it just a global function, but it's kind of associated with the class. That's a little bit of a nuanced kind of thing that I don't usually talk about this at this point. So if I lost you there, it's probably okay. All right. Let's just go ahead and make this a member function, which I think is fine. Okay, this may look a little funny. So let me talk about, before we go write this, let me talk about another kind of syntactic thing here, okay? I have days and months there, with no calling object in front of it, right? But I'm saying it's a member function. So what's going on there exactly? It is correct syntax, by the way, I'll tell you that. So it is value returning, right? It's returning the number of days in the month. Okay, but how come there's no calling object? No, I'm not going to put an argument in there. I'm going to call it exactly like this. Here. With the calling object. Right, so this is a member function. Inside a member function, if I just say a member of the class without anything in front of it, that means that member of the class of the calling object. Whew. Okay, I'm not sure that made sense. I mean, it did make sense, but it was probably too complicated to follow. So right here, when I say day, that means the day data member of the calling object, right? Okay, so it's the same thing with functions. If I say days in month there by itself, that means the days in month member function of the calling object. Or in other words, the calling object is going to be the calling object again on this one. Yeah. Right, we're already in this, that's right. That's why we can do, syntactically, why we can do this is that we're already in the scope of date. Okay? But the fact that we're already in the scope of date still leaves the question of what's the calling object going to be when I call this? Which object is it going to be? The answer is whatever was the calling object when I called the increment function is also going to be the same calling object when I call the days and month function. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of fast forward a little bit here. Here's another issue. Okay, sorry, issues keep coming up before I can finish this up. Should the days and month function be a public function or a private function? So go ahead. Depends on how I want to use it. Okay, do I want this function to, the question is, do I want this function to be called by the client program? Well, whether it's modifying any of the data members or not is, I see what you're saying. So there's really maybe no, it's not important to make it private, because it's not modifying any data members anyway. But conceptually, we're writing this function as sort of a helper function for our class. We're not writing this function because we want the client program to be able to call it. Okay? So, technically it should probably be private. I think in the notes I actually don't do that. I actually think I make it public, although I can't remember for sure. But just to illustrate that, I'm going to go ahead and make it private here. So I've got days and month returns what? Int days in month. Oops. Okay, so down here, int date : days in month. And so the way I would do this is I would say, there's a lot of different ways to do this. I see about 30 different ways every semester, but I would go with switch month, and then I would say if it's a 2, then I'm going to say if is leap year. So this is one of the few times, let me just finish and then I'll talk. If is leap year, return 29. Else, oops. Return 28. So normally I would say, don't put a bunch of code like this inside one case of a switch statement. It gets pretty messy pretty fast. Instead, call a function that does it. But I think in this case, because it's just one case of the switch, and it's just very limited kind of situation, I'm going to go ahead and do it. If it's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, if it's 4, or 6, or 9, or 11, I'm going to return 30. And then if it's default, I'm going to return 31. Okay? Any questions or comments on that? Yeah. Should I put a break after 2 and 11? Is it going to work the way it is? It is, right? Because I've got returns in there anyway, so I don't need the break. Okay. All right. So now can I test this and see if it works? I have to write his leap year. Okay. Sorry? Less than 7? Oh, less than 7, right? Yeah, copy it from the lecture notes. Except same thing here. I can't quite copy it because I'm going to make it a member function. Bool is leap year, whatever the current year is. And so, and again, just like the other one, I could copy that function exactly the way it is and decide to make this a global function instead. I would argue probably making it a member function is better. Yeah, I wouldn't have to change that much. And the advantage of making it a member function is that you don't have to worry about having accidentally some other function with the same name or something like that. That's a global function. Okay. So, bool date : is leap year. So what do I do? If year modulus 400 equals 0, return true. If year modulus 100 equals 0, return false. If year modulus, then it's return year modulus 4 equals 0. Right? Now on both of on the is leap year function and also on the, what was the other one? Well, let me just say this. On some of these functions, and definitely on the is leap year function, you're going to find probably more concise ways to write this function. Like you could Google this function and probably get some C++ code that does this in one line. So I actually prefer doing it this way because I can read it this way. And it makes sense to me. When I look at the one-line version, my brain's not quite big enough to make it make sense. Okay? Which probably, maybe this is arrogant, but I think probably means there may be some other programmers in the world in the same situation. So anyway, that's a debate that you can have, but I'm just telling you I like it this way better, yes. Does it run faster? Yes. Can you tell it runs faster? No. Does it ever matter if it runs that teeny tiny bit faster? Well, if you're in some sort of a really specialized application area where every billionth of a microsecond counts, then you might be concerned about that. But 99.99% of the programming you're going to do, that difference is going to be less important than the difference in the readability of the code. Right? Okay. And the readability of the code and the reusability of the code it gets to the bottom line in a software company, right? Because the more readable the code is, the less programmer time is going to end up being put into that program if it needs to be debugged or modified or maintained or something, right? Okay, end of digression. Where were we? I think we're done. I can check this and see if it works now, right? So just to increment the date, I had to do an increment function and then a days and month function and then an is leap year function. So a lot of work for just one little thing, but that's okay. Did I forget the prototype? No. Bool is leap year. If is leap year. Oh. Jeez. Well, you know, I think that harkens back to my Pascal days, which was about 20 years ago now. Yeah, I did, but it should be there. Actually, to be honest, I'm not sure if that was really to end the switch statement or if I just forgot that I'd already ended the function. Anyway, I think that looks good, right? And then I'm actually going to indent this a little more so things line up correctly. Oop. All right, try that again. So we compiled, and let's see, I want to increment a date. What would be a hard date to increment? 2/28, and then if we do it on a leap year, right? Like 2000. 2000 was a leap year, right? But I'm interested in 2000 because it's a little more interesting because it's divisible by 400 and 104. Anyway, so that should give me 1 day later, day 2 is 2/29/2000, right? But if I do it in a year that's not a leap year, so 2/28/1900, why did I choose 1900 and not just some like 1983 or something? Because it is divisible by 4, but it's not a leap year, so that's kind of a boundary case, right? It's kind of an on-the-edge kind of case. Those are the kinds of cases you want to look for. 1 day later, day 2 is March 1st, 1900. That's correct, right? So what if it's, well, I think that'll work. Well, yeah, it'll work. 2/29 of a year that's not a leap year. 2001, right? And bumps it up to March 1. Really what it should do is it should say, sorry, that's not a valid date, right? I mean, if I'm going to do that, I might as well do like, what's the next day after January 42nd, 2005, right? Oops. Well, it's February 1st, right? Okay. All right, so I think we're done with our increment function. And there's only one more function that I want to add to our class before I'm done adding functionality to our class. But then I'm not done with it. Still, I've got some other stuff after that. But okay. Whoa. I hit the insert thing, right? There. Okay. So I want a function called increase by. What function is this analogous to? I mean, what operator is this analogous to? plus, right? Okay, is it plus or is it plus equals? Good question. If it's plus equals, that would mean that it's changing the calling object, right? In this case, does it look like I'm trying to change the calling object or not? Yeah, I'm saying, this is like saying day 1 gets day 2 plus 12, right? Okay. If it was plus equals, I wouldn't have that. Yeah. Okay. So in this case, I'm not going to change the calling object. I'm going to add 12 to it and return the result. Does that make sense? So that's a little different than what I did with increment, where I just changed the calling object and didn't return anything. Okay. And then it's going to say after setting date 1 equal to date 2 plus 12, date 2 is still whatever it was before. Okay, so I have that COUT statement there specifically to make sure that date 2 didn't get changed by accident, right? And then, but date 1 is now the new value, whatever date 2 plus 12 is. Okay? Okay, let's go and look at increase by. What's the return type? Date, right? Everyone okay with that? Okay. When you work on assignment 9, this is a very common problem I see with students. They see that the return type, for some reason they can't conceive of the return type being the type of the class that they're writing. So they look at this and they go, well, the return type, well, I have to return a month and a day and a year. How am I going to do that in a return type? Okay. No, the return type is just date. And when you think about it, like I said before, just look at the function call, right? How can I tell what, this is an expression, right? The thing I have highlighted there is an expression. What type of an expression does it need to be? A date expression, right? Because I'm trying to assign it to a variable of type date. So it better be a date expression over there. So that tells me the return type is date. Okay, and then the name of the function was increased by, and then what was the parameter? Int. Okay. So I'm going to come right here. I'm going to say date, colon, increased by num days. Okay, so some students are going to freak out now because they see the word date twice in a row. Okay, but just keep it straight in your mind, right? That's the return type. That's the class that this function is a part of. They just both happen to be date in this case. That's just coincidence. Okay? How am I going to do increased by? Yeah. Okay, so I've got a function named increment already. I could just call increment num days times. Does that make sense? And that would be, the nice thing about that is increment already takes care of the keeping the months days less than what they're supposed to be, and the number the month less than 13 and all that. Did you? I'm not supposed to modify the calling object. That's true. So what am I going to do? Yeah. Make a date object inside this function. Exactly. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to set temp date equal to whatever the calling object was, right? How am I going to do that? Okay, so help me out. Okay, I could do that that'll be fine. That's not a big deal. But I do have a function named set, right? So I could just say temp date dot set month, day, year. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, good question. Temp date gets date 1. What do you think about that? What's date 1? Well, in this function right here, date 1 is nothing. It's an undeclared variable, right? Undeclared identifier, right? This is actually pretty important, okay? This point that I want to make here is you're not going to have date 1 or date 2 inside your calling objects, right? Because inside your member functions, right? Because those are the calling objects. Those are objects in the client program. If you find yourself wanting to put things like that in there, then you're thinking about it the wrong way, right? Because next time it might be date 2 dot increased by. In fact, I actually think it is. So you don't know whether it's going to be date 1 or date 2. Anyway, so you can't do that. As it turns out, well, you shouldn't assume that you can even use the assignment operator here, right? I haven't told you whether you can use the assignment operator on objects or not of type date. As it turns out, you can. It doesn't always work right, though. So that will be like one of the first things we talk about in CS11. So for now, we're just not going to do it. Okay. Besides, we can't anyway because we can't say date 1, and I haven't told you any way to refer. What we really want to say, sorry, we're digressing, but that's okay. We'll just digress for a minute here. What we really want to say is temp date gets calling object, right? Does that make sense? And actually, there is a way to say that in C++, which you don't need to know about, but I'll just throw it up here so you're seeing it. This is a way to refer to, you know, I want to refer to this calling object. So I say this, yeah. Yeah. Stay tuned for CS11. Okay. By the way, people are going to listen to this recording who are not going to have any idea what CS11 is. That's it. So everywhere I said CS11, if this applies to you, you should just replace like the next C++ class. Okay. Date, temp date, dot set. Okay. All right. So we started off temp date equal to the calling object. Now what do we want to do with temp date? Increment it. How many times? Num days. So what should we use to do that? The for loop. For temp date. What? Not sure where that prompt came from. Okay, are we done? Sorry? Oh, we need a return statement because this is a value returning function. Return temp date. Okay? Let me just tell you that I'm sitting here and like every 10 seconds I'm thinking to myself, oh, they need to know exactly, there's something exactly like this in assignment 9. Okay, so pay really close attention to all this stuff. Yeah. This will be in the notes. Okay. Done, right? Can I test this now? I've got a client program down here with increased by. Oh, I spelled it increased by. I think it should actually. I think increased by is better, right? This is supposed to be date 1 is equal to the date 2 object increased by 12. Okay. Was I consistent? Increased by. Yeah. So now I'm going to be increasing a date by 12. So I might want to do something. I might want to do a February date still, right? Like maybe 2/28 in a leap year, so 2000. After setting day 1 equal to day 2 plus 12, day 2 is still 2/29. Oops. Oh, 1 day later. Got it. Whew. 1 day later, day 2 is 2/29/2000. After setting day 1 equal to day 2 plus 12, day 2 is still 2/29/2000. But day 1 is now 3/12/2000. That looks right. Yeah. And if you were really going to do this, you'd want to test it with December 31, right? 1999. So January 13th. One day. Okay, that's a long time ago, but it still works. Okay. Here's my dilemma at the moment. Time out just for a second here. Oh, I didn't post assignment. Did I post assignment 9 yet? Well, okay, I think we're out of time, so I'm going to have to stop. And you're going to have a hard time getting very far with assignment 9 because there's one more little thing I need to tell you about it. You guys want to? Can you guys hang out for 10 more minutes? And we'll cover one more thing, and then you can really get going on assignment 9. Let's do that, okay? If you have to go for some reason, feel free. I won't be offended. And you can, look at the recording later. Okay. What I need to talk about is constructors. A constructor is a member function that is automatically called when the client program declares an object. Okay? In the future, like when you take your next C++ class, constructors will become critical, like you can't live without them. Okay? Right now, we're just going to use them in a very limited way to just sort of say, okay, when I declare a date object, I want it to be automatically initialized to something. That's what we're going to use a constructor for. And that's actually true in general. Constructors are used so that when an object is declared, it's automatically initialized to something. That becomes more important later on. Okay. So we're going to say that when dates are declared, they're automatically going to be initialized to January 1, 1600. Okay, so here's how I write a constructor. 2 things you need to know about the syntax for a constructor. One is there's no return type, not even void. Okay, you just skip that part. Okay, it's just a regular function, a regular member function, except 1, there's no return type. 2, it always has the same name as the class. The name of the constructor is going to be the same as the name of the class. So my constructor here is going to be what? Date, nothing in front of it. Sorry? No, I want to make it public because I want if I make it private, then the client program won't have access to it, and so when the client program declares object of type date, it won't be able to automatically call it. So the constructors are always going to be public. Okay. Even though they're in the class, okay, the weird thing about constructors is they're member functions, but they are not explicitly called in the client program. Does that make sense? They're implicitly called, but they're still called, and they can't be called if they're private. In front here. I will write constructors with arguments, yeah. But, sorry? Correct. It can have arguments. Let me answer that later, because I'm on a time limit here. Okay, so there's my constructor, and then down here it's going to be, what am I going to type in my function definition? Date. Anything else, or just, well, colon, right? And I'm just going to say month gets 1, day gets 1, year gets 1600. Done. Okay. So now if I see what I just did? I declared a date, and the first thing I'm going to do is print it out to see what it is. So let me try this. Did I forget to erase? Oh, I have 2 declarations, yeah. Try again. Okay, so when first declared, date 1 is January 1, 1600. So you can tell that our constructor got called, right? Just to kind of emphasize that a constructor is nothing more than just a function that gets executed. There's nothing magical about it. What if I said, cout, hi, I'm the constructor. Okay? Not something you'd normally see in a constructor, right? But just to experiment a little bit, what's that going to do? Well, I have 2 declarations. Hold on. Here's my client program. I have 2 dates declared there, right? That means the constructor is getting called twice. So I say, hi, I'm the constructor, twice. Wouldn't that be fun if you were like using, I don't know, Excel or something, and all of a sudden you did something and you popped up a message that says, hi, I'm the constructor. Okay, you can also have constructors with arguments. Okay, so if I say date, int, in month, int, in day, int, in year. Okay, same thing, same name as the class, no return type. Okay, so I'm going to say month get. So this is a lot like the set function, right? In fact, I could just call the set function here, but I'm not going to. Day gets in day, year gets in year. Any questions about what's going on here? The only question may be, how does this get called, right? So let me show you how this gets called. Okay, so I added this new code here. Date 2 after my variable declaration. So normally this should just be date 2 semicolon, right? But instead I've got parentheses after the name of my new date object with 3 arguments listed. That's how you call a constructor that has arguments. Okay, so now when I run this, when first declared and initialized to 2/28/1965, date 2 is 2/28/1965. Okay? All right. I know I kind of breezed through that. I just want to say one more thing. This syntax here for declaring variables and initializing them by putting something in parentheses afterwards is new. Don't think of it as being too mysterious, though. It's just a way of declaring a variable and initializing it on the same line. And we've already done that, right? We say int count gets 0 all the time, right? And as a matter of fact, you can say int count and put the 0 in parentheses instead of putting equals. And it's just a different syntax for the same thing. Okay? So this often looks a little mysterious to students at first, but it shouldn't look that mysterious. We're just declaring an object named date2 and initializing it. Just like here we're declaring an integer named count and initializing it. Okay? All right, so I am almost done talking about the date class. There's a little bit more I need to do next time, but this is enough for you to get a very good start on the assignment. Okay? See you next time.